I am live with one of the most needed topics today, and that's the EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. Look, we've done past shows on this, but this one has a little different twist on it because here we're big on going upstream to detoxification. And I would have to say, look, I deal with many, many very, very sick people from all over the globe, and many of them are becoming more and more sensitive to EMFs. As a matter of fact, it's a big part of their detox and something that we need to get out of their life. Just like if someone's living in a moldy home, we find that if they don't fix their electromagnetic frequency input, it's very difficult for them to detox even other chemicals. So it's kind of the bend of this show, at least part of it. And we're going to talk in general about EMF for those new viewers, but we're going to twist it on how this affects detoxification. Because look, my R number one of how we detox in the 5 R's of cellular healing really is removing the sources. And this is a new source. And this is a source, if we don't remove, it seems like we can't get rid of other toxins very easily. And it definitely affects almost every function of the cell. And that means it's affecting the other 5 R's. So EMF is a big deal. And I'll tell you, we have a really great expert today. So Doctor, well, I almost said doctor, but Nicholas, you're not a doctor, but that's okay. I'm going to call you doctor. Nicholas, and this is one of my favorite wines too. So it's and I was going to mispronounce it, but the Pineault or the Pineault is basically how you said it. So I had a different pronunciation. So Nicholas Pineault, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Pompa. It's a real honor to be here.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it, and you're bringing a lot of expertise here today. Matter of fact, one of the first things I asked you is, hey, do you go to people's homes and fix these things? Because that's been a big, huge request. People are trying to fix these EMF exposures in their home, and I know this, that when they find these sources and they fix them, gosh, it's huge to what it does to the rest of their detox and how their body just simply starts to detox much easier, and it definitely takes away a lot of symptoms. And we'll talk about all these things, on this show for sure. So, Nicholas, let's talk about EMFs in general, just for some new viewers, because a lot of people are saying like, what are you guys talking about? Electromagnetic frequencies. So, what are they as a starting point?
Sure. Well, EMF stands for electromagnetic frequencies or electromagnetic fields. So we're referring, really, my work is around the new EMFs that we're exposed to, because in nature, there are such thing as natural frequencies, natural electromagnetic fields. One good example that I cite often is the UV rays from the sun, right? This is a type of radiation, if you will, UV radiation, that you do not feel, you do not hear, you do not see with the human eye unless you have a special camera. And when you get it on your skin, you produce vitamin D. So there's such thing as benefit coming from the UV. On the other hand, if you stay in the sun all day, the UV will burn you. So there's also a dose response. So it can be good, it can be bad. In the case of man-made EMFs, the new EMFs that we're exposed to, we're referring to mainly probably the biggest one that has increased in the last, decade or 15 years is microwave radiation, or radio frequency, it's also called. And this is from anything from smart meters, smartphones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular towers, any kind of a wireless device that you use uses these EMFs. And it turns out that our biology has barely been exposed in history of mankind to microwaves. For example, the average level in a city, I'm looking at the street in front of me, I'm definitely being affected even by a cell phone at 30 feet, right? I'm being exposed. And the average background levels in a city is now a quintillion times higher than back just a few years back, or back what our ancestors were used to be exposed to, or even, you 30 years ago. Like no one was affected or was exposed to microwave radiation unless you were a military personnel working near radar ranges. That's the first exposure that we got of microwave. So it's brand new exposure to human biology.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, right? I mean, this is because obviously these things do occur in nature. So I mean, then it kind of begs the next question. playing the devil's advocate, we have people who are sensitive to it that appear to be affected by it, and people who aren't. Is the body adapting? I would say this: young kids. I didn't have these exposures like they are today growing up, but are kids today, because they're exposed to so much, is the adaptation fast enough? Is it too slow? Are kids today, just more in generally adapting faster? I mean, what's your feeling on that?
I don't think we're adapting that well, considering a lot of things, considering the propensity of everyone to electromagnetic sensitivity that people, especially doctors that I talk to, are seeing. It's increasing. You mentioned seeing that yourself. I talked to Ben Lynch. He's seeing that. Dr. Klinghardt. So it seems that unfortunately, a lot of people, it's contributing to their toxic load, if you want to call it like that. And there is a very strong synergistic effect between EMF exposure and toxin exposure, especially heavy metals or pesticides or certain classes of chemicals. And this is extra calcium influx into the cell. And this is research by Dr. Martin Pall, Pall, who showed that the calcium channels in each of your cells stay open because they get disrupted by microwave radiation. And this happens very fast. And this calcium channel stays open a lot, and a lot of calcium ions are allowed to flow in. And the downstream effect of that is, well, you can have DNA damage, you can have opening of barriers, you can have so many things. But guess what does the same thing, extra calcium influx? Well, when you have excitatory heavy metals that trigger your NMDA receptors in your brain, or any kind of glutamate toxicity or excitatory, junk food or MSG, it does the same. It will open the calcium channels and you will have extra calcium flow in. So it's a perfect synergy. And something else that does that is mold. So when you look at the science that Martin Pall has put together, and a lot of people in the environmental medicine world, it's clear that there's a synergistical effect that is not accounted for by people setting up the standards. In fact, the standards are based on, they're not based on biological effects, they're based on a heating effect, which is completely ludicrous. So it means that they have little understanding of what exactly these EMFs are doing to us. So science is scrambling, trying to explain these things, and industry is financing studies to make sure that everything appears to be safe.
Yeah, I know Martin Pall well. I've spoken to him on this subject, and his no ono cycle I've taught for years. I started teaching it, it might be going on 10 years now. I don't know. His very first book, I was introduced to because I was chemically sensitive. So the no ono cycle gives an explanation of basically an inflammatory cycle, inflammation cycle that feeds back into itself in many ways. And, I can tell you clinically, it's right on, that I know that Shoemaker and other people would say it's the genetics, testing the genetics for people who are more sensitive to mold. I haven't found that. I found that the people who have other neurotoxic, basically issues and accumulations are really the ones that are more sensitive to mold. And I would say the same with EMF. So you get multiple exposures, multiple stressors that open up these calcium channels. Now it just takes one more exposure, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So therefore, the people who I find reacting to the EMFs in a very negative way are the people who have other neurotoxic exposures, whether it's lead, mercury, mold exposures. You put them all together, and it's a perfect storm. It really is.
It's exactly what's seen by people who treat the sickest patients on the planet, especially Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. Yours truly is the same thing. You see a patient, Dr. Klinghardt told me the average patient he sees has seen 23 other practitioners before him. So it means that, so it means that most people have missed something. So either they've missed, maybe they use detoxification methods that do not work. Maybe they missed some kind of emotional trauma. But he says the number one overlooked factor is EMFs. And he also told me something that completely shook me to the core. He says that there's two types of Lyme patients: those who get better because they follow my EMF recommendations, and those who don't. and they don't follow my recommendations and they still sleep with a cell phone under the pillow, they do not get better. So is it because impaired melatonin, you don't have the restorative sleep, you don't have the lymphatic system that works, you don't detox at night for that way? Or is it because EMFs reactivate Lyme or other parasites and make them stronger? It's unclear, but it's so many, it's probably a lot of things that we're forgetting as well. It's just that when you play with nature, when you play with your light environment, when you play with your EMF environment and with junk food, you just modify the way nature intended things to be, and you end up with consequences. And it looks like it's multiple ways that these EMFs are affecting us, especially during sleep.
I agree. I think we don't know completely why, but clinically we see it. Look, it's just Lyme. I could say the same too. It's if you don't deal with the heavy metals like mercury, you seem not to be able to, fix the chronic Lyme. So these things have an odd synergy together. So I would say it's the same, like Klinghardt says. I agree with him. There seems to be an odd synergy between these things. So Lyme, we better pay attention to EMFs. You better pay attention to heavy metals. I'm going to, be honest. These chronic Lyme cases, they're chronic because something is allowing. Lyme is opportunistic. We have literally 90% of certain populations that test positive for Lyme. Why aren't they all sick? So there's other factors. And I think, I agree with Klinghardt on this, that, we're seeing that these other factors could be heavy metals, could be EMFs, probably a combination of all of them. And I would love to see the research on the people who are extremely heavy metal, because it seems to, run, or I'm sorry, the people who are very sensitive to EMFs, it seems to run that they have high heavy metals, right? So, also another odd correlation. What I have to ask, I should have probably asked this right at the top of the show. Nicholas, what got you into this? What was your background in, and how did you end up doing all this?
Sure. Well, I've been a copywriter for TV at the beginning of my writing career after uni. It was 10 years ago. And I spent a couple of years writing on my own just out of interest about health and trying to educate honestly, at the beginning, it was my friends and family, because I found so much misinformation. And I, as a journalist, have a curious mind. And I found, oh my God, saturated fats might be okay after all, or salt isn't as bad as the authorities make it, or the truth about dietary cholesterol. It totally shook me. And I was like, oh my God, that's unacceptable. People need to know these things.
I love it.
There I was eating egg whites, right? So these things kind of frustrate me when I find that bad information is vehicled. And for 5 years, I wrote a daily newsletter. I'm still writing a newsletter to thousands of people around the world, just sharing my findings. And 2 years ago, I don't know exactly what got me into it. I think it's Deborah Davis' book, Disconnect. And I read her book about, well, everything about EMFs, especially the political side of things, and how they're tested, these cell phones, and how it's nonsense. And I just started reading one book after another, and then I started listening to everything. And I tend to be extremely obsessed. At least my wife would tell you that. So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna write a book, and I'm gonna make every book out there. I summarize all of this science in something that can be consumed in a single sitting almost for practitioners. And some people I've woken up some practitioners because they read the book and they're like, oh my God, it's actually an issue, or oh my God, there's actually science behind it. I wanted to make them understand, okay, guys, it's credible and it's critical, even though it's unclear. Let's face it, like I never claimed that something is definitive, especially not EMFs, that the link with brain cancer. Okay, what number of hours do you need to talk on a cell phone to get a glioma? I don't know, but who cares? We need to reduce exposure. And I also care about something that most people don't talk about in health circles. They're especially evidence-based people and skeptics, and they're like, oh, well, there's no study about that, there's no study about this. Yes, but what about the doctors that are treating people and seeing them get better in a low EMF environment? To me, that might be even more important than clinical studies, than any study. Like, well, guys, we're seeing patients get better. Klinghardt is, and you're probably seeing like what could be called by the mainstream a miracle of healing from just turning off a Wi-Fi router and this and that, and put in a Faraday cage over the bed, a canopy, and people all of a sudden their health comes back. well, we need this information out there. So it got me extremely passionate. Published a book. I've been talking a little bit in conferences, and I think I must have done 40 podcasts since the last August. I'm trying to be all over the place because I think it's unacceptable that even holistic practitioners, now I discover, well, 99% of them don't get it. They don't understand what to tell their patients. Even in their questionnaires, most of them don't even have the simple question, do you have a cell phone under your pillow while you try to heal from XYZ? Very important. So now my path, I think, in the next year is going to be educating practitioners, because I think it's a huge missing gap, missing link that they're overlooking.
Well, I know you do a course for practitioners. I'm going to have you at one of my seminars. I think because you're a journalist, it's why the information you're putting out is so usable as well, right? You're taking the science. I love you journalists. I just interviewed Del Bigtree, right, on the vaccines. And gosh, I don't know a man on the planet that knows more about the topic, because y'all just have a way of digging for the information and finding the truth. So I appreciate that. Matter of fact, just for my viewers and listeners now, give them your website. How can they find out more about you? And also some, I made the comment in the beginning of the show, people want to know that, is there someone that I can find how to make my home safe? So give them some resources for these things.
Sure. So if you want to hear more about the course, it's called Electrosmog RX, and it can be found at electrosmogrx.com/Pompa. And if you want to read the book, it's emfbook.com/Pompa. And then if you want an expert to come to your house, it's possible to have them on the phone first if you already have an EMF meter, or if you're a practitioner, or if you have particular questions. But then you can probably find one in your state. And the best website for that is hbelc.org, or if you type building biology on Google, you'll find them. And there's a tab at the website, find an expert, and you'll be able to go, okay, well, I'm in Florida, there's a few of them. Unfortunately, and there's a big opportunity for anyone who wants a job, by the way, because it's going to be so in demand, right? Being a building biologist, going to people's home. And these guys have way more knowledge than I'll ever have about certain technicalities of how you remove different sources of EMF. So my number one recommendation for anything complicated, you want a shielding job, I have a smart meter, how can I protect myself? Well, hire a building biologist is my answer by default. But now there in the book and in the course, I talk about several things that you can do on your own, though. And that's very important to point out. And I'm sure this is something you talked about in previous shows about EMS, but creating distance from any device, if it's on your body, airplane mode. And these things are key, because right there, you might reduce your exposure by 90%, at least your exposure that is acute to different parts of your body. Extremely important. Then your Wi-Fi router placement, or lack of Wi-Fi router. If you're extremely sick, Klinghardt recommends never using Wi-Fi at home. And this is something, if I'm talking to an audience that is more beginner, I'll say, okay, well, put it on a Christmas light timer and this and that. But if you're sick, if you have something, a health challenge that cannot be figured out, or something life-threatening, it's not time to play around with a little bit of toxins, right? So it's not initially time to have a one drink every 2 days. It's probably, you want to go clean for a while. So not having Wi-Fi and being wired with Ethernet cables, the entire house, is one of Klinghardt's recommendation. Another thing that he recommends that I think is really, well, very, very interesting, is just turning off the circuit breakers to the entire house. Is his recommendation for all of his sickest patients, because you reduce your exposure to electrical fields. And unless you have a building biologist that can take measurements and tell you, okay, turn off the number 1, 5, 7, 11, you might as well turn off all of them during the night. Except, and the only exception he told me, is if you're on life support. So if you're not on life support and you want to heal, turn off everything. And that's his approach, is shotgun, but he gets results. And this is because he doesn't tell his patients, okay, well, maybe turn off the Wi-Fi from time to, no Wi-Fi. And people that get on board with that heal way faster.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the Christmas light timer. You can put it on 6 hours, 8 hours, right? And it
Sure.
automatically doing it, because invariably you're going to forget, and to have it happen automatically like that is beautiful. And again, I think that's just something everybody can do, whether you're sick or, or not. Just again, whether you're sick or not, I mean, you don't want to, be ingesting toxins every day. We want to minimize those sources by eating all organic, right? Being very careful what fish we eat. Well, no different than EMF. It's like, why wait till you're sick? Yeah, so those are just great things right there. I mean, I have a device called a TES 593 that
Yeah.
I took around my house and was like, holy cow, it's this mouse. You can see it's wired in now, because I couldn't believe how much electromagnetic frequency it was giving off, right? And this phone that I have, this is just a landline phone now, and it was too, but I didn't know it was so high, because it wasn't a cordless phone, but it had cordless capabilities. So who would have thought that it was still putting off that frequency? But it was. So I discovered that by taking my thing and going around the house. My fish tank, it put off a massive amount. I had to shield it. So anyways, some surprises there. But
well, there are surprises, and this is really one of the reasons, especially people that are sick, practitioners, people that want to go deeper in this, having a meter is extremely important. And this is something I was talking with Dr. Joseph Mercola to get the course together. And he said, Nick, practitioners don't get on board unless they have a meter and they discover all these little trickster around the house. I call them. I have an Xbox. When it's plugged in and turned off, it still emits constantly. It's like a mini Wi-Fi router. You gotta unplug this. If you have a printer, unplug the printer, because it still emits. So if you have a meter, you'll discover a couple of things like, oh my God, why is this emitting? Well, it's emitting because, I don't know, engineers are lazy. I don't have a good explanation. Why would this electronic device still emit and use your electricity at home, where you clearly told the device turn off? It's nonsense to me, but still it is the case. And with the Internet of Things, that is the plan for the industry to have everything with a chip in it, and every chip being Bluetooth or some kind of EMF emitting chip. Well, you're going to have EMFs blanketing your home environment. So not participating in these different sensors and whatnot, I know it's not convenient. And people, I know if I'm on a podcast for entrepreneurs and I say, well, maybe it's not the best idea in the world having an EMF device on your wrist pulsing in your blood, they don't like me. They don't like hearing this message. And yet I think it's important to have this discourse, and important to also say, okay, well, maybe if you use a tracking device, let's say a Polar H7 heart rate monitor is Bluetooth, it's for 1 hour and you work out 3-4 hours a week, I wouldn't worry about it compared to everything else, right? So we got to stay sane within the discourse. But still, if you use an Apple Watch and it's 24/7 and you use it to track your sleep, well, a device that's used to track your sleep and that emits a signal that is linked with melatonin disruption, I don't think it makes sense. I think Oura Ring and these other trackers that can be turned off, or at least the signal can be turned off, makes more sense. So we gotta care about these things.
Yeah, I mean, Oura Ring, Joe and I wouldn't use it for a while, because I would put it on airplane mode, it would come back on, but they've corrected it. A lot because of Joe Mercola, who basically said,
that's what he told me. Yeah. So it's fixed now.
Yeah, yes, they're new rings. Perfect. That they have fixed it. Yeah, so the Oura Ring can be, and then you just in the morning you just download it, but you had it on airplane mode. It's still gathering, the information. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. Matter of fact, you're answering part of my next question, is some of these, hidden sources of EMFs around people's homes. Where are they getting them? And you're answering some questions of what they can do about it. So, what are some of the other big sources around a home that people maybe not think about?
Well, it might be a smart meter. And that's something, if you look for, if you're a practitioner and you look at maybe a disease or symptoms that appeared apparently out of nowhere, sometimes it's reactive to, oh, well, there's an array of smart meters that were installed near the bedroom or in the vicinity. So certain smart models of smart meters emit 1 time per day. If you have a meter and you can verify that and it emits nothing except 1 pulse, it's probably no big deal.
Yeah.
But if it emits 6 times per second, like certain other models, and it's really hard to tell which is which. I don't have a good website for that, and that's unfortunate. But if your smart meter, how to tell it's a smart meter, is a digital readout instead of the 5 little quadrants spinning. So it's a good sign that you have that. Exactly. So it's one source that can be forgotten. And also, well, the EMF environment changes around you. If you're in a city, maybe you don't know, and all of a sudden you have symptoms and you don't realize, but in just the roof of your neighbor condo has now a cell phone tower, because the telecom industry rents or actually will pay the owners to rent the roof, and they can make up to $10,000 a month sometime to just rent for cellular towers. And the neighbor or the person that lives underneath on the 4th floor, they're not told that this is happening, or they're told that everything will be fine. And we think it's a problem. Oh, no, it's probably other countries. It's probably like India, and they do things stupidly. No, it's Toronto, Canada, that has the biggest amount of cellular towers in the downtown area, from what I heard from Magda Havas from the Trent University. So it's in our neighborhoods. It's in Canada, in the US, and it's probably I would say 2 of the worst countries when it comes to EMFs probably on the planet, because and maybe Australia, because our authorities are not acting on these things. Whereas you have France banning smartphones in schools over health effects and anxiety and social media and a lot of other reasons, but still it's part of the reason. Banning Wi-Fi in nurseries, India dismantling thousands of cell phone towers and putting them, like removing them from near playgrounds and hospitals, and they're doing something about it. Israel, Cyprus Island, so many different countries. So it's not a crazy topic. And if you just Google around, you'll realize that a lot of countries are starting to take serious action. It's been years, but in North America, it's the opposite. We're moving towards faster technology. And I don't know if you want to talk about 5G, but I think it's so important that people know that it's increasing, but in a major way in the near future.
Yeah, no, let's talk about it. And you answered some great questions. I mean, check to make sure. By the way, when they put these things on the side of your house, these smart meters, they don't tell you. It's so it just happened. Friends of ours were like, I went out, I had a smart meter. Yeah, so look what he said. If it's the old analog movement of the numbers, then you're okay. But if it's digital, you've got a smart meter. Then the next question is what type is it? My suggestion would be call your electric company immediately. So no doubt about it. So yeah, let's talk about 5G.
Well, 5G. So I read an article last week about new cell phones in 2019 having 5G capabilities. The industry wants to roll out this new 5G thing, and basically 5G stands for 5th generation. Right now we have the 3G and we have the 4G, also called, well, there's a variant LTE, long-term evolution, but basically we have 2 different cellular networks, the older 3G and now the 4G LTE. Now they want to go to 5G. And why is that? Because user demand, because you and I demand high speed videos. We want the 4K YouTube. We want the streaming. And this is the main reason that the industry is moving forward, which is the users keep purchasing the newest stuff, and we love our technology. I'm guilty. I have a computer. I have an iPhone. I don't even know what iPhone this is. It's probably a 7. So, I mean, it's just like I will buy as an entrepreneur the newest technology, and I'm participating in that, in encouraging these companies to make money, and then I'm paying them every month. So unfortunately, we're all part of the problem. But 5G is a problem because of the multiplication of the antennas, the different sources that you talk about, removing sources. Well, we're going to be exposed to thousands of times more cell phone antennas in the near future, especially in large cities. Why is that? Well, 5G, instead of using microwave radiation, it uses the same radiation you'd get at the TSA scan, which is millimeter waves. So instead of 3 gigahertz maximum on a cell phone, you would get 30 gigahertz or 45 gigahertz or 60 gigahertz. And these frequencies, first, we don't have a lot of safety testing. It's basically rolled out without any pre-market testing in human cells and whatnot. It's basically on the premise that everything is safe right now. They're rolling the next generation. So it's very convenient for them to keep the status quo and say, no, the right now there's no problem. Electrosensitivity is in the head. No mechanism of action are seen. There's no study, and all of these statements are completely reverse. They're completely untrue. So we're going to roll with 5G. So 5G is high power millimeter waves, but short distances. So it means that you have to install these small cell antennas that they call, and it's going to be one antenna at every traffic light sign per provider in New York City. So this is the plan, because the mayor wants to be first. And in other cities, I'm sure San Francisco is thinking of doing the same thing. I mean, these mayors, they don't have the information about health effects. So they think, well, I want to be the first. This is the future. I want to be modern. It also enables stuff like, well, the self-driving vehicles. So if you want to have self-driving cars, they need to be connected with each other and with a grid in order to communicate, to avoid accidents, and to coordinate all these sensors. So it's also a kind of requirement from the future technologies, the way they're built, at least. It requires 5G to be installed. So it's going to be a multiplication on top of 4G and 3G, because there's going to be a long period of time where we're going to have the three of them. It's not like 3G will disappear tomorrow morning or 4G. So it's going to be just the power density. Everything will be more biologically active. How can I put this? It's going to be harder to stay healthy in a city. And if you go outside now, it becomes critical in a 5G environment to shield your home and to do something, to do more, to hire building biologists. I think it might be possible to stay healthy. I mean, we're still healthy in this world, but we're using detoxification methods that have nothing to do with what our ancestors used to require necessarily, because our environment is increasingly toxic. You got to increase what you do. I think we'll find ways, but we're at the higher end of understanding these things. People that don't have a clue and they don't know, they're going to get very fatigued. Yeah. They're going to get very sick. I
mean, hearing that, it's like almost, you start answering my next question. Gosh, what do we do? And this is Cellular Healing TV. Cellular detox is what I teach, and we just find that detox methods that, downstream that, may have helped people in the past, they're not really helping people now. The key, where the impact is, Martin Paul, you brought up his name, it's the cell. It's the cell that the EMFs affecting the detox pathways, of the cell. And now it makes us more vulnerable even to all the other toxins. So you have to fix the cell to get well. And the big part of the answer, you said it, as more and more of these toxic sources, including EMF, are coming into our environment, the more we have to step it up. And that's why this cellular detox has become just revolutionary in today's environment. So, I have to ask this question, because before I lose it, you brought up the millimeter scanners. At the airport, it's the ProVision. That's a millimeter scanner. Yes. So what's your feeling on those scanners? I always opt out. I always opt out for the pat down, unless I'm like extremely late running for my flight. Then I'm like, dang it, and I put the hands up. But otherwise, what do you think about those things?
Well, you'll be surprised on this one. I don't think the scanners are that much of an issue. And why is that?
Because they're so short of an exposure?
It's not only that, it's worse than that. I think the fear of the scanners is just based on misunderstanding of the EMF spectrum. So what do I mean by that? The power density, I've looked at a test of different scanners all over the country. This is a very recent test. So it was a field test. They looked at the radiation emitted by these scanners to make sure they're within the safety guidelines. And the safety guidelines are, honestly, I don't care about. But the power density that they used, these scanners on your body, it's half a second, and it's 90 microwatts per square meter. Your cell phone in a different range emits up to 500,000 microwatts per square meter.
Wow.
So in millimeter waves, if you have a 5G phone in 2 years, and you have it here, and let's say it's your neighbor on the subway train, essentially they will be blasting you with at least 1,000, if not 5,000 TSA scans per second. This is the comparison that I
Yeah,
can make.
that's
So
a massive comparison there. Yeah, so in the
it's
scheme of things, it's minimal. You know, listen,
exactly,
I opt
exactly.
out because I found one study for a negative. It was a from Mexico study, and it was enough for me to be like, okay, more needs to be known. Remember the old one that they used to do? They said was safe, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and then it turned out it wasn't, right? It was like so that you didn't see those anymore. It moved it. So it's like until we know more, I opt out.
I do the same, honestly.
Yeah,
And
yeah, but
even with
hey,
that information, I do the same, but still,
right. But
it
still, it
just,
seems like you have done more research on this, and then good. Okay,
yeah.
you've done more than me, that's for sure. So maybe I don't have to opt out. I'm still paranoid. I'll be honest.
Yeah, well, I would still be honest. I mean, it's not, I don't know. I think I'll still do it, but at the same time, it's kind of silly. If this is true, if these, like, I cannot go with an EMF meter and verify, but it's been conducted independently. So I think the numbers are accurate, but it just, for people avoiding the TSA scanners, they don't realize what's coming, and the magnitude of radiation is going to be used in the same frequencies. So the millimeter waves that are used, I think it's 24 to 30 gigahertz. It's the same. And of course, well, the authorities are going to say, well, the scans were extremely safe in the first place, and your cell phone, extremely safe. They're all happy to tell us how safe these things are, but no one is even caring about the biological effects. So whether it's the effect on calcium channels, Martin Pall, or there's also a guy, Paul Heroux, Heroux, from Montreal, actually, University of Montreal. He's showing that the EMFs will disrupt on the mitochondrial level. His work goes. So it's complementary, but it's just another effect, and who knows what else. But these biological effects are hard to quantify. I cannot tell you, like, okay, this amount of EMFs, this power density, this frequency, this pulsing equals this amount of damage compared to junk food. It's not, we don't have these studies, but one thing is sure, it's a huge factor, and ignoring it and following the meme that says it's perfectly safe, it's almost insane to this point.
Let's talk about now, how some of these EMFs can shut down detox pathways, affect detox pathways, because it is part of leading to this epidemic of what we're seeing. And, in one way you actually mentioned, it disrupts your delta sleep, your deep sleep. And that's your delta sleep is really when your brain is clearing. I mean, literally letting go lymph. I mean, in many different toxins from the brain. So if you're minimizing your delta sleep, you're toxifying your brain. And I can tell you from clinical experience that you don't get people well until you detox the brain. So that's one way, but talk about some others, and you might want to add to that.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of researchers looking at different mechanisms of action. One of them it's from Holly Johansson, who's been researching this for so many years, and he's from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and he's been fired, or let's say put to early retirement by the institute, because the institute is financed by telecoms. But anyway, that's the politics. But for the mechanism of action, it looks at how electromagnetic fields, it calls it calcineurin inhibition. So it's a type of white blood cell, and really how it acts on suppressing your immune system. So it's not directly related to detoxification, but I think it's really, really interesting. I think also there might be something to do with the blood-brain barrier, and that's particularly or other barriers in the body. So the leaky gut and the testes or ovaries barrier, or the barrier that are so important to your body to maintain the toxins outside, right? So for example, if you look at studies on rats, it's clear that low-level EMFs, less than exposure to a cell phone, maybe just exposure to Wi-Fi, can increase the different markers of brain permeability in animals. So that's proven. Now, how does it translate to humans? It's not clear. And there's also something interesting, is that more effects are seen at lower levels. So there's a window of biological effect that looks like maybe a cell phone doesn't open up your blood-brain barrier, but maybe a cell phone at 3 feet do. So it's bizarre, because certain cells in the body have certain responses to certain frequencies and certain power densities. And it's Darius Lysinski. He's from Finland, and he was part of the IARC decision to classify EMFs as 2B in 2011. He's a well-researched, well-published researcher, and he talks about that in a recent presentation of how you have biological effects at the beginning, and at some point you stop having biological effects on the blood-brain barrier, which might mean that overall background levels might be more harmful to some degree than acute exposure. So it's a very complicated thing. But if you open this blood-brain barrier, you have more toxins that can flow in. And you have also one study about different markers of thyroid. I think it was thyroid hormones found in the spinal fluid because it was leaking. So you also have the good stuff that leaves through the barrier that shouldn't leave, right? So that's also something. One thing that concerns me highly is, while I'm saying to you and to other people on podcasts, don't have a cell phone next to your head. Well, what if you use a cell phone next to your belly button because you're texting away? So I look on the people, I'm waiting on the subway train every day, and I look around and everyone is texting and it's right next to their gut. So if it's opening blood-brain barrier here or might, well, what is it doing to leaky gut? And is there a link with autoimmunity and different things? And the answer is probably yes. Again, it's the link is only beginning to emerge, but I think it's concerning that it can open the different barriers in the body. And this is one way that, let's say, you will toxify more, and that is definitely a problem.
Yeah, no, and Martin Paul's work affects detox. The no-ono cycle, I mean, I started teaching his cycle years ago, as I mentioned, because of its effect on the 5 R's. My 5 R's is a roadmap of how we detox, how we fix a cell. And when you're driving chronic inflammation that's feeding back into an inflammatory oxidative cycle like the no-ono cycle that he made popular, you're shutting down detox pathways multiple ways. You're affecting methylation, you're affecting glutathione, you're affecting inflammation in general.
SOD.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, and that's going to affect your cell's ability to detox. Literally, it affects all of the R's there that affect the cell's ability to detox itself.
Yes, exactly. And ways to raise that, I think that a potential, well, I wouldn't say a cure, but let's say a fix for that would be to really focus on raising the NRF2 pathway. And this is something that's getting more and more popular, and there are multiple ways of doing that. One of them that's very, when it comes to supplements, for example, is hydrogen-rich water or molecular hydrogen.
Yeah.
Tyler LeBaron is talking about that quite a lot.
In fact, I just did an interview of him not that long ago. Within the month, I would say. I know Paul is interested in that, Mercola, myself. The hydrogen, now that we're able to get through this technology, evidently could be it protects in the calcium channels that we're talking about with the EMF opens up and other toxins. So hydrogen, could be a new game player. So
I would think so.
Things. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And one of the ways that it seems to help, at least in many studies, is by, they call it a selective antioxidant. So there doesn't seem to be detrimental effect to taking more, or at least the effects. For example, if you take too many antioxidants, there could be a downside to that, like being too antioxidant and not enough oxidant. But it looks like molecular hydrogen, maybe you'll be able to take more. So if we can all have machines at home, molecular hydrogen, water, all the time, maybe it's going to be one of the ways in a 5G world to stay on top of things and to just combat the oxidative stress that is caused in the cell. But other ways to raise NRF2, I mean, there are multiple. Photobiomodulation, getting enough sunshine, red light therapy.
We Juve light. We use the Juve light. I stand in front of the Juve light every day.
Exactly.
Just minimizing these exposures.
That helps. Exercise in general, calorie restriction and intermittent fasting. There are so many different things that you can do. So researching more on NRF2 and how to support that, I think it might be extremely important for people that struggle with the no cycle. So it's overall just fighting inflammation through raising your natural defenses. So NRF2 will raise your natural SOD production and your natural glutathione production. So, and it's supporting normal methylation and all these different things. But it's really, I think these are the multiple ways that EMFs are affecting detox. There are so many ways, but I think probably the number one thing that you can do for detox would be to sleep in a low EMF environment. And then the second thing I would add to that, that Klinghardt recommends, is grounding at night. And with a caveat though, because if you use one of these grounding mats, he recommends, again, turning off the circuit breaker and the Wi-Fi and all the signals, or else you might be doing more harm than good. You just don't know. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because you mentioned the grounding at night is a big deal, right? Give what is the source? There's different grounding mats you can use. There's sheets. What do you recommend for the grounding your bed? And that's what Nick's talking about here, folks.
Sure. Well, I haven't looked at the different types. Some of them are grounding bands that you'll put here at your wrist, or maybe the sole of your feet. There's a acupressure point to detox. Like, I don't remember the exact one, but there's a grounding pad that you can put underneath your sheet. This is the one I use at home. Grounding pillow, grounding everything. I think it all comes down to experimenting, but I have to ask Klinghardt, and I want to do that to have better recommendations to do. But one thing I can tell you is that having a grounding rod in the bare earth seems way superior than having it plugged in a ground outlet. So ground outlet only if you cannot. I'm at the fourth floor right now. Very hard to have a clean ground where there's no voltage. So if you're by the countryside, or you have a house, a cottage, maybe running a wire through your window and having a ground, like I think it's a truer connection to the earth. But yeah. And one thing that Klinghardt told me is that once you start grounding, expect extremely strong detox reactions. So this is my link with detox for you. And it looks like there's probably multiple mechanisms at play, and probably deeper sleep is part of it. But I think there might be something else, because if you look at just grounding during the day in a clinical setting, you look at Oshman or Dr. Chevalier's research, Dr. Gaetan Chevalier, I had him on my course. It looks like it's an antioxidant effect, and it's also a calming down of the nervous system that might kick your detox ability through the roof. And what Klinghardt says is that you have to take binders, some sort of real binders. He talks about cilantro and chlorella. I know maybe you have different things in mind, but either way, making sure that you support expelling these toxins, because it will likely supercharge your ability to mobilize these toxins.
By the way, we have a product called Bind. It has 4 different binders in it, far superior than cilantro and chlorella, which they bind, but they're not great binders for heavy metals.
That's what I've heard too.
Yeah, they're weak binders. But Bind is a product. We take it at night, ironically enough, for that very reason you just said, because your body dumps. It does. And that's why we do that. We discovered that, years ago. But yeah, what you're saying is, you put a copper pole or a metal pole in the ground outside. You run a wire basically in your window, which, you can keep your window closed. You can run it around it. And then how would you ground your bed with that? Just like wrap it around one of the metal things? I mean, what would you do with that?
Sure. Well, you would have a grounding pad, for example, which is a large pad that looks like a foam, but it's embedded with silver threads. And you can have a wire that goes in there. There's a little plug in it, and you just snap it. And then you have an entire pad that goes on your body, or it goes under. It can be under the sheet, and it still has some benefit. Other means would be to have a grounding pillow. So the pillow itself would be silver thread with cotton, and then you would sleep on there. So have the effect on your head. So this is really how you would go about it. And it seems I've heard all sorts of people talk theory, right? And theory is one thing, and people say, oh my God, sleeping, like using a ground outlet is really detrimental. It can backfire, all sorts of things. But I trust Klinghardt more than people who say that because they heard it from someone else. So I would say try it, and I would say expect detox reactions. But so far, it looks like there's more benefit than harm. And Klinghardt has been using that for 40 years. And he says it's very, very key that you ground. And it looks to me that grounding our connection to the bare earth might be just as important as sunlight to some extent.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's new stuff. There's no doubt about it. Is there a website that people can find some of these grounding methods or products that you like?
Sure. There's one that's just called, let me pull up the website, earthing.com. Earthing.com, and this is not officially linked with the researchers that are part of the Earthing Institute, but I know they do recommend the products. Earthinginstitute.net if you want to find about the research behind earthing and many clinical studies that have been conducted in the last 10, 15 years alone by Gaetan Chevalier, James Hoshman, and a few of these guys that are really at the cutting edge of looking at the real science behind grounding. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we appreciate that. That's fantastic. Look, it's amazing how fast this time just went. You can tell I'm fascinated, obviously, with this subject because, look, if I didn't, I wouldn't believe it unless I saw it, and because it's one of those just crazy things. But I see person after person that reacts to EMF. I discovered it myself. And this was, ironically enough, after I got well, but I had a hotspot on my phone, and someone called me, right? You know how you hotspot your internet into your phone. I put the dang phone up on speaker, actually, and maybe I had it this close, maybe this close, but I was in a room and I was trying to get out, and then I kept it. I forgot it was on hotspot. Anyways, man, I was wacky for a couple hours. I mean, and then one time we had the Bluetooth on the car. My kids, I didn't even know it had the capability. Your kids figure out how to turn this stuff on. And my son and I were in the front seat, and he said something like, "Do you feel weird because I turn on the Wi-Fi for the boys in the back, right?" And he's like, "But I swear to God, I feel it." So my son said that. I'm like, "I'm so glad you said that because I was wondering what was wrong with me." And we had to turn off that Bluetooth. It's like, but point is even, I'm healthy now, yet I still felt it, and the fact is, where are we going to end up, Nick? I mean, one final question. I mean, honestly, I mean, what is going to happen? We have a generation being exposed to glyphosate that opens up the barriers. We have a generation that's already been exposed to high levels of heavy metals. I talk about generational toxicity, and now we have this new EMF problem. I mean, what's going to happen here? That's why I asked the question earlier. Is this younger generation possibly adapting faster than we are? Otherwise, the generation is going to die off. I mean, what do you think?
Wow, yeah, I never got asked this question. It's a charged one, and I'm going to be a new dad in April, so that's definitely something I'll start thinking about. I just turned 30. I'm a youngster. And before my 40th birthday, I want to have biocompatible wireless technologies. I think the good part is when I talk to engineers and when I talk to biologists and when I talk to people who know a lot more than me, I realize that it might be possible to develop communications that might heal us instead of harm us. For example, you might use the right frequency. If you use the right frequency and the right pulsing, it's called PEMF, and it's used in a medical setting, right? And why do they use frequency XYZ or this other one? It's because they've tested it, and they tested it in cells, and then they figured out. So we didn't take as a human society the time it required for us to tame these new signals. But once we do it, I think as far as the EMFs go, like I don't have solutions for glyphosate. I just know EMFs. But I think it can be fixed. And I think we can come to an agreement with the industry where we're going to have ultra fast lightning speed communications, but that are going to be compatible with humans and with nature alike, because the effects on nature we didn't even touch about, and it's staggering. So I have the hope that it's going to be seen, and my hope is 10 years. Maybe it's going to be 50, hopefully not, but I think we can start developing these things. And I think one thing that's going to happen, though, and I talk about that in a couple of podcasts, people, Elon Musk and all the billionaires they're developing two things at the same time: 5G and satellites blasting the planet, and better healthcare. So these things are in direct opposition in some way or another. And they're developing AI. So there's going to be one day they're going to wake up and their AI is going to tell them, dude, you realize that I am sending a signal towards your brain and it's harming you? Do you realize that? Because I have the blood markers right here. And then they will adjust the technology within a couple of years. Because this is how fast the humankind has been able to go above and beyond to fix things. We used to be X-raying children's feet for the shoe store fit, and now we're using it. Yeah, we're using it in a medical setting. X-rays still have their utility in our society. It's just very controlled. So I think in the future we'll have PMF devices communicating. Who knows? But I think there's hope. I like to be optimistic about that.
Me too. Me too. Listen, great show, Nick. This is going to be one that's going to be shared a lot, no doubt. People need to hear this show, and you have a really eloquent way of making it simple for people and giving a lot of people solutions. So give your sites again one more time.
Sure. So emfbook.com/Pompa. You'll find my latest book. It's called The Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs. It's really Thank you.
Send me the book, please, because I always like to get a book before a show. Yeah, I didn't get
Sure. Do you want a hard copy or a PDF?
Yeah, I mean, I like the hard copy. Man.
Okay, I'll send you one.
Fashion, Nick. I'm 50s, man. You know, we don't. I highlight, and I'm dyslexic. All kinds of.
I'll send you one. I'll send you one. And the second link is the EMF course for health practitioners, and it's called Electrosmog RX. So electrosmogrx.com/Pompa. And I forgot to mention, there's a rebate for people listening to this, and if you use the coupon code Pompa, POMPA at checkout, you'll get 10% off.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that, by the way, for my viewers and listeners. And it's an important topic, and I'm glad you did that for them. So great, absolutely great show. I'll tell you, right now the cellular healing, cellular detox, message really applies here, because, we have to keep our cells well. With these extra stressors, forget about it. So we see it clinically, that's for sure, Nick. Thank you again. We appreciate you being on. We're going to have you at one of my seminars, so we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.